Chapter 20. Baby, come back. You can blame it all on me. I was wrong. The song played in Terry's ears. She always kept her music player on while she worked, and today was no different. For some people, the music would be distracting. For Terry, it helped her to stay focused. It had to be music she liked, but also music she was very familiar with. Nothing new was allowed. It was the morning after her meeting with the museum's senior curator, and she was anxious to get started with her new assignment. To Terry, it was almost like a treasure hunt, but this one came with a guarantee. Like shooting fish in a barrel, she thought to herself, as she unlocked the creaky old door leading to a long staircase, which itself led to the sub-basement where the archives were kept. Turning on the old twist-style light switch, Terry began her proverbial descent through time. As she proceeded down the staircase, she began noticing a significant layer of dust on pretty much everything down there. At the bottom of the staircase was a fairly good-sized area laid out as a workroom. The light was dim since many of the bulbs were burned out. Twisting the switch only turned on 3 of the 12 light fixtures. There were tables in the middle of the room, and the walls had various empty shelving units, file cabinets, and a couple of sinks. Before she could get any work started, a deep cleaning of this room needed to be done. No way would she bring artifacts into this room for study in its present condition. Before she left the room to go get cleaning supplies, she spied a rather large set of double doors to the left of this room with a sign above them, simply reading, Archive. Retracing her steps, Terry retreated into the supply room and loaded herself up with a menagerie of cleaning supplies and other necessities. Returning to the anteroom, as she started calling it, it took her about half a day to get things up to par. By the time she was done cleaning and replacing all the burned-out bulbs, the room she now thought of as her lab looked quite respectable. All the time she had been cleaning, she meticulously avoided the door to the archive. She knew it was a bit juvenile to do this, but she was saving opening that door for later, as a present to herself for all the hard work she was doing to get her lab ready. While the typical archaeologist's tools of the trade are trowels, shovels, screens, hand brooms, and dustpans, Terry was more of an urban archaeologist. She'd be digging up artifacts for sure, but she'd be digging them up from dusty shelves in the archive. On the center work table, she set up all necessary contrivances to facilitate recording the artifacts being cataloged. This included her laptop, as well as more traditional writing implements. Part of her job would be to photograph the items, so on another table she had her high-definition camera and a light box to render good lighting for the smaller items. Larger items might involve the in-house photography department. Once all her work areas were set up, it was time to go back in time. Like Howard Carter reaching out to remove the last stone blocking the door to King Tut's tomb, Terry selected the perfect song on her player and strode to the door of the archive. Turning the lever-action handle and opening the door, the first impression Terry gained from the experience was the rush of cold air that greeted her. The air had a tinge of dust, but thankfully no odor of mold. Beyond the door itself, though, she saw absolutely nothing in the pitch-black darkness. Returning to her lab, she secured a large flashlight and went back to the door. Turning on the flashlight, she searched nearby for a light switch and found a rather large and very antique one. For a moment, Terry wondered about the state of the electric circuitry, but decided to try closing the knife switch anyway to see what happened. Terry grasped the handle of the switch and flipped it to the closed position. As soon as she did, enormous lights began to power up in the ceiling, revealing a stairway leading down to a single room with huge columns interspersed throughout, punctuated by the ever-present hum of old lighting fixtures. She could now see an absolutely enormous room spanning the entire length and width of the museum above. The walls of the room were all painted in a yellowing Navajo white, and the ceiling was covered with old asbestos acoustic tiles. the kind with thousands of small decorative pinholes. The room contained rows upon rows of shelving units, spanning floor to ceiling, each unit reaching 6 meters high. Terry sat on the top step, drinking in the enormity of the task at hand. This wasn't going to be a job done in a day, week, or month. It was going to take a year, maybe 2 or 3. Step by measured step, she started down the staircase, making sure each was secure and wouldn't give way beneath her. The steps were metal, so she knew she was probably safe. At the bottom of the stairs, she looked from floor level toward the top of one of the shelving units. She noticed some of the shelves were each a foot tall until the next shelf above, but sometimes they formed larger areas depending on the size of the artifacts being stored. When she reached out to touch one of the items, she was startled to hear a beep in her ears. Figures, she thought to herself. My music player chooses now to die on me? Reaching to her belt where it was fastened, she flicked off the device, removed her earbuds, and draped them around her neck. Continuing into the room, Terry looked to the left and to the right of her position and started counting. On both sides, she could see dozens and dozens of shelving end caps. Immediately in front of each were at least half a dozen file cabinets. Opening the nearest to her, she discovered documents that were notes and other paraphernalia related to the items in that row of shelves. Looking down one aisle, she saw each section of shelves extended about 20 meters. Beyond that was a perpendicular aisle crossing, followed by another set of shelves, each framed with its own set of file cabinets. Closing the file cabinet, Terry crossed the closest aisle, slowly examining eye-level items. When her music player made another beeping sound, she reached down, dislodged it from her belt, and examined the switch. It was off. Thinking this was an oddity, but nothing more, she replaced it on her belt and continued on. She began noticing a pattern in how items appearing to be from the ancient Minoan culture were arranged on a particular set of shelves. The metal artifacts were inscribed with hieroglyphs, resembling Egyptian hieroglyphs, but of a type Terry recognized as an undeciphered hieroglyph style called Linear A. She had done a paper on this particular language while still in college, which was why she recognized it right off. Its successor, Linear B, had been deciphered, but the understanding of Linear A remained elusive. There were pots, small tables, statues, and various pieces of jewelry that in some way or another had a common theme. Many of these had depictions of the head of a bull, a recurring theme in Minoan religious culture, although archaeologists could only theorize why the bull played such a large role. Next to one item was a small index card outlining how it was found in a small cave in Crete, at such and such a location by such and such an archaeologist. As time went on, Terry realized that with each new revelation and each new shelf, she had been breathing shallowly. Her body eventually rebelled, declaring a state of emergency due to the general lack of oxygen. Stopping to breathe deeply, she decided now was a good time to beep. Oh, for the love of... Terry reached down, grabbed the music player, ripped out the battery, and put it in her pocket. There, take that, she said with righteous indignation, mixed with a slightly evil smile. Now, where was I? Ah, yes. Terry felt it would be a good idea to start cataloging, not the individual items in the archive, but the shelves themselves. It appeared each shelf held items from one particular culture or era. Looking again at the end caps, many of them had worn and tattered 80-year-old labels cataloging the culture represented by the items on the shelf. I think I'll just start with a pad of paper and beep. What the? There it was again. Now that the battery was out of her music player, it was obvious the beeping wasn't coming from that source. But the sound was definitely electronic in nature. This archive hadn't seen humans since well before the advent of electronics, probably sometime around the Second World War or even before. What could possibly be making that kind of noise? Now that she thought about it, it seemed like the interval between the beeps was a regular amount of time, like maybe once a minute. But where was it coming from? Beep. Terry looked at her watch and noted the time was 1:37 and 17 seconds. Looking up, it seemed the sound came from her left, but it was hard to tell. The walls were all bare, so sound rippled and bounced around quite easily. She started to slowly move in that direction, trying to locate the source. The end caps, which still had labels, revealed subject matter ranging from the European Middle Ages to African cultures to Asian cultures. Beep. She looked at her watch again. The time was 1:38 and 17 seconds. Exactly 1 minute. Definitely electronic. Terry started to get annoyed at the probable sloppiness of some unauthorized person leaving his or her cell phone, or perhaps some other electronic device down here. This area was supposed to be off limits. The door to the room had been sealed until Terry arrived. She wondered if there was another entrance to the archive she didn't know about, through which another individual had undertaken a foray into the unknown. The more she thought about it, the more it made sense. All these artifacts certainly hadn't come in through the anteroom, especially the larger ones. There must be a freight elevator somewhere. She made a mental note to look for such a contraption, so that later she could beep. The sound continued coming from a specific direction, so Terry moved slowly, all the while watching her watch. When the second hand swept around the 17-second mark, she would stop and listen. More than once, she proceeded down a shelving corridor, only to find the beeping becoming fainter, necessitating she retrace her steps. Eventually, she came to a set of shelves labeled North America, Eastern Seaboard, 1875 to 1899. The next beep led her to open a drawer labeled Field Expedition number 5894. The inside of the drawer was lined with burgundy velvet, and nestled in the middle of the velvet was what appeared to be a golden artifact with incredible hieroglyphic markings. Glyphs unlike any she had seen before. Beep! Clearly and distinctly, the beep came from the artifact. It certainly wasn't a cell phone, like she originally feared. It was roughly oval in shape. The back of the item was covered with these strange glyphs. On the front, there was a smooth surface polished to a mirror finish. Terry was immediately captivated by this item. Its beauty was astounding, yet the most enigmatic feature of this obviously ancient item was the perfectly timed beep. She would never dismantle the item to see why it was beeping. It was far too amazing and ancient to risk anything like that. But why would this item display behavior reminiscent of modern-day electronic gadgets? Realizing this would be a great inaugural artifact to photograph with her camera and light box, Terry decided she wanted to take a closer look at the hieroglyphs. Images are the best way to do that without having to worry about damaging the piece. She gingerly carried the item to her lab, fired up the light box and camera, and took several high-resolution images of all sides of the item. When she took it back downstairs and returned it to its place, she brought her notepad and used the remaining time in the afternoon cataloging the rows of shelves. Terry put the battery back in her music player and spent the rest of the afternoon listening to some really good tunes, punctuated every minute by the beep. That night, she took home prints of what she came to refer to as the golden beeper. Hopefully, she could compare the glyphs on the item with some information in her old textbooks. Time would tell. Hey, fellow Galimarians, this is Dan Adrian, and I just wanted to say thank you for listening to my book. If you can, please click like down below, because it really helps me bring these videos to you and lets me know what you like. Also, if you haven't already, please subscribe and click on the bell so that you'll get notified when I release more chapters. If you have any questions about this or any other of my books, or if you want to know more about what it takes to write a novel like this one, please make sure you leave your question in the comments below. Thanks again. I'll see you soon.